It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a high school social studies teacher, a middle and high school principal, and now coach and support school leaders here in the Los Angeles area. And as always, I'm joined by
Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. And I'm a high school history teacher. I've been at it for 15 years and counting. And this is All the Above, a show where we take an unstandardized look at education because mainstream media outlets don't really talk about education very much. Bunch of haters. So take a look at the links in the description so that you could get to our audio-only podcast if you want to listen on the go. Head over to our website to see previous episodes. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. Now for today's All of the Above, what do we have on the agenda?
Well, Manuel, we got a good one.
We always do.
Per usual, if I might be so bold to say so. But of course, we're going to kick it off with our Do Now, where we get into those fascinating headlines in education, all the good, juicy stuff that people should be talking about, but that probably nobody's going to tell you about.
Haters.
And then we're going to transition into our main segment where, last episode we talked about some of these tensions between teachers and administrators, and we thought it'd be cool to help kind of connect with our wonderful viewing audience and folks listening to the podcast, connect a little bit of our personal stories. So our own journeys. How did we become the educators that we are as two folks who have taught in several districts across the country, as two black men in education? How did we come to where we are, and what keeps us in the profession? So we're going to dig into that today and hopefully connect a bit more with our audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. First up, though, is the Do Now. Let's take a look at this week's headlines.
All right, folks, it's time for today's Do Now. Manuel, how are we going to do it today?
Man, Jeff, it's report card time. Yes, we got to look at some grades.
Yeah.
And first up, first grade.
Better hurry home, get the mail before mom gets home.
Nah, it's electronic now, man. They just log in. They just got to hit their log in and see that, man. No more playing those games.
All right.
First grade is a B.
So, Mr. Rustin, what can I do? Can I do a little more work? Get that up to an A, like 85 rounds up to 90.
It's not always about grades. It's not always about grades. And this B, we can change because this B is about bias.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
all right.
You didn't see that coming?
I didn't. Left field.
All right. So, according to a 2016 report by the Urban Institute, people still have tremendous amounts of bias when they hear the terms urban or inner city, particularly as it relates to schools. So this report found that although the country's public school system in the decade since 2005 has shown tremendous gains, and schools in large cities have seen gains at double the rate of schools in suburban and rural areas, people still have or still harbor incredible bias against urban schools and inner city schools. The achievement gap between urban and suburban or rural closed nearly a third during the decade since 2005, and in some cases, it's non-existent. But middle-class white parents tend to make assumptions otherwise, and research suggests that those assumptions are largely results of racial biases. Jeff, does it surprise you that even if a urban school is doing great and making great gains, a lot of white parents still associate that school with negative impressions and negative thoughts?
No, not even slightly. It pains me a little bit to say that, but this is a fascinating story because it involves the intersection of two studies here, right? So one study looking at the closing of the achievement gap, or the relative closing of the achievement gap over the last decade, and then another study looking at white parents' perceptions of the relative urbanness, urban being one of those, sort of coded words that can kind of mean whatever the speaker wants it to mean in a lot of ways, but we use as a euphemism essentially to politely say poor, black, and brown. Right? And so this study examining people's kind of stuck in the mud attitudes about the term urban and how they would describe their own school, and the reality of improving schools and yet people still not feeling like the perception of those schools is any better, even though the results are objectively better, right? So I think this goes right to the heart of like the deep dark, ugly underbelly of the
Yeah.
United States of America, and the fact that we built, chocolate cities and vanilla suburbs, and we, this gets to all the history
Right.
here, right? And it's about people making choices about where to put their kids. So it doesn't surprise me at all. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and what was really interesting to me was that these are schools in areas that weren't necessarily in the center of a large city. So a school in what would be considered outside the center in traditional suburb area that had poor performance was more likely to be referred to as an urban school, despite the fact that it wasn't necessarily technically geographically in the urban area.
Yeah.
And study also found that white families were, for every 1% gain in the achievement of their local school, they were 15% less likely to refer to their school as an urban school. So the better the performance, the less likely they would be to refer to that school as an urban school.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the sort of intersectional factors here is around the impact of gentrification, right? So as cities become gentrified and poverty expands outside of the sort of urban core to areas that we used to call the suburbs, but now we're calling urban, we're seeing the same problems manifest in those communities that we used to have when we had the more sort of strict chocolate city, vanilla suburb phenomenon. Now we're, I guess, going more for the European model, vanilla city, chocolate suburb, so to speak. So
it again shows us that really it's never quite about the performance or location or anything. It's really about the students who are sitting there in those rooms. And when these families, they talked about Chicago public schools, for example, and how a lot of schools in Chicago are doing much better than they used to, but still there's this desire to desire from white families to keep their kids out of Chicago public schools. A lot of times, no matter what the performance is, no matter what the indicator suggests, like just seeing those black and brown students in there is enough. And then adding the term urban or inner city, just forget about it. Like you said, like it's not even about the performance. It's really about old school segregation.
Yeah, same song, different day in many ways.
All right, next grade.
All right, next grade, Manuel, is a C.
A C.
Yeah.
All right, about average. Not bad. I'm passing. I'm getting my credit. Okay.
Yeah.
Feeling good.
C in this particular case for community college, and C for convicted felons.
Whoa.
Interesting,
That's
right?
the interesting dynamic.
So fascinating recent article on the website LAist for local folks here. It's a sort of local journalism web-based source for folks. And this article reported that the state of California is giving out about $5 million in grants designed to help our community colleges and some select four-year schools in the state to enroll, educate, and support those who've been formerly incarcerated. So this is it's an interesting development, maybe not totally surprising because we have this growing bipartisan movement nationally where, we found agreement, surprisingly, between Democrats and Republicans about the need to address our criminal justice system. Maybe because it's so inordinately expensive, with the cost of incarceration in California exceeding the cost of attendance at Harvard per person. So we might want to do something about that. But it's an interesting development. What do you think here, Manuel?
Yeah, I'm really a fan of this because I've had, unfortunately, several students who have found themselves incarcerated either during school or afterwards, and a lot of the reasons behind that are youthful reasons, if anything. I mean, research suggests that as someone grows older in age, they're less likely to commit a lot of the crimes that land somebody behind bars. So one would hope that, as years pass and a person regains their freedom, that they have a chance to re-enter society and get the sort of training and education they need to be productive people in society, because whoever that old them was, they might have matured out of that. And in this article, actually, something that really stands out is that LA City College enrolled 115 formerly incarcerated students from last year, and all 115, according to this article, fared very well and succeeded in their classes that they were enrolled in.
Yeah, and remained outside of prison.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So, I guess we probably don't have enough data to prove a cause-effect relationship there, but there's just no way under the sun that this hurt their chances of staying out of prison, right? And so for the economic, reason alone, the $75,000 a year we pay to incarcerate people, this is a bad use of resources.
Absolutely.
But the moral reasons that come along with that. And, as educators, I'm sure, you've seen plenty of students who are struggling with the impact of having incarcerated parents or incarcerated siblings, or other close family members, and what that does to a student's ability to focus, learn, pay attention, all of those sorts of things. And so, this is one of those policies that I think probably has like a really positive ripple effect, right? There's the individual who's getting educated, there's their family, there's their kids, and the intergenerational effect of this, and then there's our public dollars, right? Like all positively affected, ideally, by this type of program with a really tiny investment, frankly. So
you would think there's no argument against this, but I'm thinking about us when we post this video to Facebook, and I'm sure there's gonna be some trolls coming out saying, why are we spending public money on these criminals? So that's the deal. I get locked up and go to prison and come out and you pay for my college.
Pull harder on those bootstraps.
All that, and it's just like bootstraps, man. Just gotta pull hard on
like
those
Donald
joints.
Trump, he did it all by himself.
All the way up.
All he got was a small $40 million loan from his dad.
Pennies, man.
He had to go to
Pennies,
Manhattan,
man. Pennies.
all the way from Queens.
Yeah, man.
Think of the struggle.
And now these guys just get free college. Wow.
Exactly.
All right, last grade for today. What do we got? Oh, final grade for today is an F. A big fat F.
Cuts deep. That's why you got to get home before the mail arrives.
See, unfortunately, it's going straight to the computer, man. The internet's.
I know, I'm old school.
So this F goes out to, or this F is in reference to a study that came out that showed some really troubling outcomes for students in Louisiana schools who weren't allowed to advance based on their test scores. So test-based retention in 8th grade increases the likelihood of criminal conviction by age 25, according to a new study by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And what they did is they looked at students from 1998 through 2001 who were held back just because they scored 1 point below the cutoff on state tests that they needed to advance into middle school or advance into high school. And they looked at that set of students and looked at their eventual outcomes and found that being held back increased the likelihood of being convicted by 58%.
Yeah. So this story really hit home with me personally because the school that I was principal of in New York City, New York State has a test-based promotion criteria. And so I was principal of a middle school and a high school. So we, within the same school, had kids, thankfully a small number of kids, but kids who were at risk of being retained in 8th grade and not able to move on to 9th grade because of this they didn't pass the state exam, right? And so I think the larger debate about social promotion is interesting, right? I get the moral righteousness on both sides, but I think we really need to think about, like, to feel good in the moment, what are the long-term consequences? Like, what are we doing to the life trajectory of kids if we are holding them back? And I'm not saying that means we should just keep passing all the kids through and they can't read when they get to high school. And, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I think there's something better that we can do, particularly at a pivotal developmental point like 8th grade, that really makes us, I think, should make us rethink this type of policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a policy that I'm not familiar with at all because, I grew up in California and there wasn't any test that you needed to advance and get into high school. So I have no experience in this idea of holding somebody back based on their test scores. That to me it screams like a horrible idea. But on the other hand, I also have wide experience of having 9th grade and 10th grade students who basically failed everything through 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And the question becomes like, how do they end up this far? Like at some point, there's got to be something. So there needs to be some solution or some balance there, because on the one hand, you don't want to just send a message that it's just a free pass. You just move all the way on through, and then 12th grade will decide if you cross the stage or not. But on the other hand, looking at this, this one particular study, and this was just looking at the likelihood to to be convicted of a crime later on? What about all the other
And a
positive, violent crime later on? And what about all the other possible negative outcomes associated with being held back, whether it be physical health, whether it be family relations, whether it be whatever? Just really, really, really troubling. This is a valid F as far as our grades are concerned. I know we kind of do the grade thing kind of tongue in cheek, but this is terrible.
Yeah, I think having come up in New York and being sort of reared as an educator within that system, I don't think it's necessarily an inherently evil system. I do think there are a few pain points along the way where especially the idea of prohibiting social promotion is counterproductive. Right. Anybody who works with kids knows that when you see ninth graders in September and then you see ninth graders in June, those are two different human beings. Like, one of them is a kid and one of them is a young adult.
Right.
And so obviously, each child is an individual, but that's such a pivotal developmental, physical maturation moment in adolescence that I think there's all kinds of problematic reasons that should outweigh even very righteous academic reasons to make purely test-based social promotion decisions, right? If we really think that overall, developmentally, a child is not ready to move on to high school, that's a different question than saying, they didn't pass this test, therefore they shouldn't move on. And this study really dramatizes it because they're comparing kids who are one point below the cut score and 1 point above the cut score. So even from a psychometrician standpoint, these are essentially identically performing students, right? And looking at the impact of being held back on those two populations or not on those two populations, right? So, there's just so much here that to me screams, we gotta be sensible and do things better. I don't think it means that the impulse to say social promotion just willy-nilly can be problematic too. I do agree. I think there is a need to have some accountability to what needs to be learned along the way, so we're not just passing kids through, which is its own kind of soft bigotry of low expectations, to quote a Bush here on the show again. I don't know why I keep doing that.
You're a big fan.
But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, people, let us know your thoughts about these stories. Chime in below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. All right. Now, if you remember back to last episode, we had a discussion about sort of teacher-administrator dynamics and, some of the, I guess.
The mad teacher came out right here.
Yeah, man.
Threw me under the bus a few times. Still got lumps.
So that had us thinking about, we've never really gone into our history in terms of why we entered the profession in the first place. Because whether you're a teacher, an administrator, or work anywhere in education, there's definitely that lucid, clear moment for you where you decided to enter the field and become a teacher or whatever your role is in education. And we thought we'd take some time to share with the audience a little bit about what led us to education and what our origin stories are. So if you're familiar with comic books, and I think we all are because comic books are amazing, every superhero has an origin story, a story that really made them who they are. And two of my colleagues from Sacramento, Siobhan Riley and Casey McCarthy, they had a podcast where they would, for each guest, they'd ask them their origin story, what made them the teacher that they are, and what led them to the field. So we thought we'd steal that idea with their permission and share a little bit about our origin stories. So Jeff, how'd you enter this field? What led you to teaching in the first place?
Well, I think for me, actually, what led me to teaching was the idea of becoming a principal, oddly enough. So
natural born administrator.
I don't know, maybe. So in high school, at the end of high school, we had to do a career exploration project and for a class. And perhaps out of sheer laziness more than anything, senioritis more than anything else, I decided that I was going to shadow our principal of my high school. So I went to St. Paul Central High School, St. Paul, Minnesota, and the incredible Mary McBee was principal at the time. She is still principal.
Damn.
Yeah, I went
Okay.
back. I was on the committee for the 20-year reunion.
Oh, wow.
And I just met up, last summer with Mary.
But you're a principal coach now. Did you coach her up
in
some?
the office. I don't think she needs my coaching,
Okay.
man. But this allegedly is her final year, and she's really
Oh, wow,
going
that's
to
super
retire.
dope. Shout out to her. That's
Yeah,
dope.
I think 24 years of being a principal,
Oh,
which
wow.
is truly mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
She was just a really interesting, fascinating person, and a dynamic leader, I think, and someone that I kind of had a connection with and was inspired by, and felt like, this is interesting, and maybe this is something I would want to do. And I think I've always had interest in social justice causes. I was doing a lot of reading, even in high school. I felt like education is a place where my interest in social justice, my sort of desire and interest in like organizational leadership and the challenges of like, how do you get a big group of people to like organize themselves and do something really good?
Right.
Those are two things I find really interesting and a great reason to get out of bed in the morning together. And I think I started saying I want to become a principal. That was always in the back of my mind in college, and I took a bunch of education classes. And at the end of college, my decision kind of came down to law school or ed school. And I was very tormented about the choice. I was like, do I want to try to become Thurgood Marshall, or do I want to try to become Mary McBee, right? I wound up getting a fellowship that was going to pay for my a good chunk of my grad school tuition for education, and so I decided to do that, and I deferred for a year, and I worked as a college admissions officer, and a year later I showed up at Harvard Graduate School of Education and ran into you.
Yeah.
So.
Literally ran into me. That's for another day. That's for another day. But man, literally.
We'll put that in the episode extras. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. My story similarly starts around high school. For me, I always wanted to do good. I was a do-gooder. I wanted to do good with my life. I felt whatever I get into in terms of my career, I wanted it to mean something to people. And so I had a little thoughts about like teaching could be one potential spot. In my history teacher, my favorite teacher in high school, Mr. Forbes, shout out Mr. Forbes. He started a little club for aspiring teachers. It lasted, I think, one meeting, but like that's the first time.
Nerd alert.
Shut up. That's the first time that I remember like really thinking like, oh, wait, okay, teaching profession, like real possibility concrete.
Yeah.
But then, that faded over time, and I went to college, and I went to UCLA, and my freshman class at UCLA was the first class of admits since Prop 209. Now, for those of you who aren't from California, who aren't familiar, Prop 209 was basically the end of race-based admissions in the state of California. Not just for admission, it was the end of affirmative action in California.
Yeah.
And the ad campaign for Prop 209 prominently featured Martin Luther King and excerpts of him saying that, envisioning a world where we don't judge anybody by the color of their skin, and was spearheaded by Ward Connerly. I'm going to reserve my words for Ward Connerly from this episode because this is a generally clean show. But in any case, so I got to UCLA. My orientation, they had several orientations because there's something like 5,000 students that enter each year, and my orientation was about 300 students, and I was the only black male in there. Actually, no, there was one other. Shout out to Marcus. And it was just a sea of white, and it just wasn't what I expected because my older sister went to UCLA, and when I was in middle school, I would visit her, and it was just a vibrant campus, and it's just so diverse. And so, but being there as a freshman and just being in class after class after class where there was just nobody who looked like me was just a real culture shock that I wasn't prepared for, coming from my neighborhood of South Sacramento. And so that led me to start questioning, like, well, why is there this imbalance? Because I had never been, it never crossed my mind, this idea of like what some would call an achievement gap and others would call opportunity gap. That never really crossed my mind because my high school was pretty diverse, and I don't know. Again, I was a do-gooder, everything seemed great. And I remember walking to class one day. It was a hot day, and UCLA's campus has a lot of hills. I was sweating getting to class, and they were preparing tents for the Los Angeles Festival of Books, which used to take place on UCLA's campus. Now I think it's at USC's campus. So these massive tents, and every single worker that was helping put these tents up in the heat, every single one was a Latinx male. And looking around at the students, there wasn't a very heavy Latinx population. I just remember thinking, like, man, all the labor is being done by people of color, but the people in class aren't representative of those same communities. And LA is one of the most diverse areas and one of the most diverse states in the nation, and the student body should look different than this. So that led me to education classes so I could find some answers to this. And long story short, that put me on the path to become a teacher, to try to help others from marginalized communities get into UCLA so that they wouldn't have the same isolated experience that I felt I had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me too. I think I was a similar nerd alert high school student. And, you know, it's funny how that, you know, some of those early experiences, even in high school, you know, stick with you and kind of drive you to continue to do the work that that you're doing today. But speaking of that, so that's the origin story and sort of how you started on this course. What keeps you in this course? I mean, you're you know, a very intelligent, accomplished person. You could do lots of different things, but why have you made the choice and the commitment to say, not only I'm going to stay in education, but I'm going to stay in as a classroom teacher for you know the last 15 years?
Yeah, and I think actually it has everything to do with my original reason for becoming a teacher in the first place. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects of discussing with anybody why they became a teacher, because I think people's reasons for becoming a teacher have a really big influence on their experiences in the profession and their long-term outcome in the profession. So for me, seeing it as doing the work for the community, that's one reason why I've only taught in schools where I had students where I could see myself in my students. And I had students who I knew needed that support. So I remember being an undergrad, and a classmate in one of my classes told me that her school gave 2 copies of every textbook to all their students because they didn't want students to hurt their backs. So they had the copy to stay at school and then a copy to take home. And I remember thinking, like, well, damn, some schools, they don't even trust the kids with the copy of the textbook. Like, you got to keep it in the class. So with that in mind, like, I've always been dedicated to serving in schools where I felt that there were students who needed that type of support in doing that work. And that's what's kept me going, and that's why I don't think that I could see myself in a school where students come from families that are more likely to be college educated and affluent and have SAT tutors and have all that help, because I just wouldn't feel that they need me for that, because somebody would take care of them. So for me, it's really been about like reaching out to my own community in that sense. And as far as staying in the classroom, we talked about that on the very first episode of All the Above, way back when, episode 1 of season 1. And, you know, audio visual is a little interesting there, but we've matured a bit.
Yeah.
But I spoke about the career ladder and just thinking that, you know, teaching is such a rewarding experience for me. I get my energy from students. So, and I feel like I could still lead outside the classroom in different ways. So it's where I fit, and it's just where I'm happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I think to me, I've worked in a bunch of different contexts, I think, within education. Obviously, a classroom teacher. I worked for a nonprofit that managed a network of schools within the New York City Department of Education as a leadership coach to administrators and teacher leaders. I returned to a school as an assistant principal and then a principal. And you know, now work again for a sort of nonprofit district partner, but more in the school transformation context now. And I also have a consulting practice that lets me, you know, do some really wonderful work with schools and leaders across the country. And so I think for me, you know, even though I have done a lot of different things, I still very much consider myself a career educator. And very much still hold at my heart, I think, both the roles of principal and of teacher, because I think in some ways they're sort of like the purest roles in education, at least from my vantage point. And I think that, in my heart, still in my heart and in my soul is, as someone who wants to get up in the morning and feel like the thing that I'm about to go spend 8, 10, 12, 14 hours doing today is not only interesting and fulfilling on some personal level, but is also like helping to make the world a better place. And, I think that's a phrase that we toss around and, sometimes considered hokey. I mean that in like a very sober, literal sense, that like, I want to know that what I'm working on is helping to make our world a little bit better than it was when I woke up this morning. And I'm not, just seeing the world in rose-colored glasses and assuming that some days we don't take a step backwards and some days a step forward. But I do believe that education offers me the opportunity to both, have a job that I really enjoy and feel fulfilled by, but also feel with a high degree of confidence that like we're contributing to something worthy and worthwhile here. Education is the backbone institution, in my personal view, of any democratic democracy, small d, democratic society, and also such a cornerstone for people's development into good human beings. And I think that's what we do. Some people go to work and they make Big Macs, and some people go to work and they make monster trucks, and some people go to work and they make hedge funds, and we go to work and we make good people, and healthy communities. And that's exciting, man. Like, what's better than that?
Yeah.
Even on the days when it's a little rough, I still think to myself, like, damn, this is good stuff too.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of teachers, myself for sure, relate to that. And we view the profession similarly in terms of, at the end of the day, when, the light goes dim and you look back on your life, you feel that you've contributed as much as you can to make the world a better place for others. But I think there's also a lot of teachers for whom the profession maybe either wasn't their first choice or they saw it as a temporary thing. I'll teach a little bit until I do this. I've known teachers that, taught for like 2 years and then went to law school and then went to med school and sort of used it sort of as like almost like a resume builder in the sense of like, oh, I did the work on the front lines and, and that really rubs me the wrong way. And maybe that's for another time, but I think a teacher's reasons for entering the profession and staying in the profession have a lot to do with the actual input or the amount that they put into it. And I think students could tell that also, like big time.
Yeah.
So is it what you expected or thought it would be when you're looking at Principal McBee and thinking about that as your potential future?
I think so. I think in a lot of ways, yes. I think teaching was probably more what I thought it was going to be than being a principal was. I think being a principal was harder than I thought it was going to be. And in some ways, they were very mirrored experiences. Like you come into first year teacher and you're like, I'm going to change the world.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, snap, I got to get everybody to be able to like pass in homework coherently. Right. Like I got to be able to like get folks to listen to me.
Yeah.
And, it's very humbling. Right. And I think being a principal is very much a similar experience. There's just so much, and maybe this is also a reflection of the poor quality of our preparation programs, which is also its own episode in the future. But there's just so much that you don't know, and there's not a manual for, or there is a manual for, but the manual is technical and not necessarily helpful when you're dealing with human beings. And the art and kind of science of leadership and motivating people and building momentum and buy-in and community around some really difficult work is challenging. And I will say firmly, being a principal is the most difficult job I've ever had. And that's not to say that I didn't say that about teaching up until I became a principal. It's just to say I think they're both just such complex, and when you work in our context, emotionally complex when you get wrapped up in the crazy traumatic stuff that a lot of our students are grappling with as well. Yeah,
and I wholeheartedly believe that being a principal is like impossibly difficult. I mean, me and my teacher colleagues, we look at our principal and all that he does, and we're just like, we don't even know how he does that, because not just the time constraints, of course, but also just like you were saying, like sort of navigating the world with the district or state or national expectations and the legal requirements, and then dealing with the people side of it too. Like teachers, it's navigating that the academic standards and the person side of the student, which is a beast. But to be a principal and also have to manage other adults who also think that they know, this goes back to last episode and in the grasp between teachers and administrators. But for me, I think teaching has been a lot more fun than I expected it to be. I expected to enjoy it, but man, I love it. Like, it is fun, like teaching new concepts and new skills and seeing students develop, a new awareness of things. And when it all clicks and when it all is just rolling, it's just like, I think most teachers will say, like, I'm not even cognizant of like what time of the day it is, because everything flies so fast. And sort of, that's a challenging part, barely enough time to sit down and eat your lunch, but the day flies so fast.
That teacher bladder,
man,
holding it for 6 hours.
Hold it, man. That boy's rugged, man. But it's just so fun interacting with young ones, young adults, and seeing them grow, mature, and just seeing them just fill up with knowledge and ability, and move on into the world and make their own changes. Wouldn't trade that for anything.
That definitely is the part that I miss the most about, in the work I do now, where I have lots of connections with adults in schools, but not very many connections with students. And, it's when I still experience the feeling when I'm talking to my former students who are now, 27 and finishing their master's degree and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, you are grown old people. And I can't believe that I taught you when you were this little child. And now we could like hang out on the weekends. But the pride that I feel when they're reaching these milestones in life and getting married and having children and, starting families and getting jobs and changing careers. And, I still feel that when I connect with my former students, and I miss that I don't have more of that, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so there's a lot more to the origin stories, but we want to hear about yours. So if you're watching this on YouTube, chime in below. If you're watching this on Facebook, add a comment below. Let us know if you are currently or formerly an educator of any kind, teacher, administrator, counselor. Let us know, what was your journey? We're really eager to see that, to hear those stories. All right, people, now it's time for Class Dismissed, where we like to shed light and shout out some excellent things happening in education and bring some good news. Jeff, what do we have for Class Dismissed today?
Well, I'm really excited about this story. We have some interesting news coming out of the community of Watts. And I know probably everybody around the country has heard about the big recent teacher strike here in Los Angeles, the nation's second largest school district. The teachers on strike for a new contract and a bunch of different demands, which means 500,000 students in the system left without their teachers, right? So a lot going on there. And we have this fascinating story of a bunch of teachers, or a bunch of students rather, that wanted to inject some love into this very contentious political debate, as you can see in this video here. Check it out. Now, these students are students from 107th Street Elementary School in the community of Watts, as I mentioned earlier. They are heard here performing Katy Perry's Firework for their adoring teachers who are picketing outside. They also made posters to kind of shout out and celebrate their teachers, and just a beautiful show of love and support across the picket lines, and hopefully a good sign for a strong finish to the school year here in Los Angeles. So I want to give a shout out to the students of 107th Street Elementary School, to Principal Catherine Nelson, also to assistant principals Christina Torres and Alita Williams, and all the staff at the school who held it down during the strike, ensuring that the students remain safe inside the school, and it's just a beautiful show of solidarity and support. So shout out to 107th Street Elementary in Watts.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right, that's it for this episode of All of the Above. Remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check the description for links to our website for past episodes and links to our podcast and all that. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.